The exploration ship Astria floated silently in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless darkness. Stars blinked in the distance like tiny candles, but they offered no warmth, no hope. Inside the ship, everything was quiet except for the faint sound of the life support system trying to keep the last bit of oxygen running. The crew had stopped talking hours ago. Everyone knew their situation was bad, but no one wanted to say it out loud. The truth was simple. They were stranded, alone, and dying. Captain Mira Holt stood near the observation window, her eyes fixed on the stars that refused to move. She had been a captain for almost 10 years, and she had seen many things: asteroid storms, reactor leaks, even pirates. But nothing scared her more than silence. Her ship had lost its main engine 3 days ago after a burst of plasma from a nearby nebula. The explosion burned out their propulsion core and destroyed the navigation system. The backup thrusters worked for a short time, but then they too went cold. Now the Astria was nothing more than a metal shell drifting through an endless ocean of stars. The crew was small, only 7 people. They were explorers, not soldiers. Their mission was to chart the edges of the Orion Expanse, a place known for strange signals and mysterious disappearances. The mission had started with excitement. Everyone had dreams of discovery, finding new planets, ancient ruins, or even traces of alien life. But now those dreams were gone. The Orion Expanse had swallowed many ships before, and the Astria looked like it would be next. The ship's temperature kept dropping every hour. They had lost one of the power generators, and the emergency heaters could not cover all compartments. Frost began to form on the control panels. Breath came out as white mist. Food was running low and water recyclers were failing. They rationed what little they had left, but it was not enough. Most of them hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. The crew's faces looked pale under the emergency lights, and their eyes carried the same thought: this could be their last night. Mira tried to keep hope alive. She moved from one section of the ship to another, checking the systems herself even though the engineers had already done it. She wanted to keep busy because stillness made her think too much. Every sound, every flicker of a light made her turn her head, half expecting the system to come back online. But nothing did. Every system she checked gave the same answer: malfunction, offline, or critical failure. At the main control table, her second-in-command, Arun, worked quietly. He was young, maybe too young for such a mission, but his technical skills were unmatched. His fingers trembled as he typed, trying to repair communication lines that refused to respond. "The antenna array is dead," he said softly. "Even if we fix the transmitter, we don't have enough power to send a signal far enough for anyone to hear." Mira nodded, not blaming him. She knew he was right. Space was vast, and even if they sent a message, the chance of someone receiving it was near zero. They were far beyond any known trade route or rescue zone. That night, Mira sat alone in her cabin, recording a message in her log. Her voice was steady but cold. She talked about the mission, about the failure, and about her crew's bravery. She didn't say it was a final message, but she knew that's what it was. Outside, she could hear the quiet hum of the ship's dying systems, like a heartbeat slowing down. She closed her eyes and remembered her first day as a captain, the pride, the salute, the promise to bring her crew home safely. Now she wondered if she had failed that promise. Hours later, Arun came to her with a desperate look. "Captain," he said, "there's one more thing we can try. The old distress beacon, the one built before the wars." Mira looked up, confused. The distress beacon he talked about was ancient technology, more than 100 years old, stored deep in the ship for emergencies. It worked on long-range frequencies that modern fleets had stopped using decades ago. "It might not even function," she said. Arun nodded. "Maybe not. But it's our only chance. It has its own power cell. If we activate it, someone might hear us, anyone." The crew gathered in the communication room. The old beacon was a round metallic device with faded markings. It looked like a relic from another time. The engineer Lyra wiped dust off its surface. "It's amazing this thing still works," she whispered. The small light on the beacon flickered weakly, showing a sign of life. Mira stared at it for a long time. Activating it could drain what little energy they had left. But what choice did they have? The crew was looking at her, waiting for her decision. She pressed her lips together and nodded. "Do it," Lyra pulled the lever. The room filled with a low hum, and the beacon's light turned from red to bright white. A coded signal began pulsing through space, slow and rhythmic, an SOS pattern from humanity's oldest emergency system. It was the same signal that had been used during the ancient interstellar wars, when colonies begged for rescue as their worlds burned. Now it was echoing again, racing through the void, repeating the same cry for help. SOS, SOS, SOS. When the transmission started, everyone stood in silence. The message was being sent continuously, bouncing through deep space like a heartbeat. For a brief moment, there was a sense of relief. They had done something. They were not completely helpless anymore. Maybe someone would hear them. Maybe help would come, but deep down Mira felt uneasy. The signal sound was strange, old, and almost haunting. It reminded her of history lessons from her academy days, stories about how this specific frequency had once been used to call the war fleets of the old Terran Defense Force. That was centuries ago, during a time when humanity fought for survival across galaxies. The beacon they just activated was designed not only to send an SOS, but also to trigger a military response. Those fleets were long gone, destroyed or hidden after the Great Wars ended. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Mira shook off the thought. She told herself it didn't matter. All she wanted was to save her crew. She sat down near the window again, staring at the stars. "Please," she whispered. "Someone, anyone, hear us." Outside, the void remained silent. Hours turned into a full day. No reply came. The crew grew weaker, colder. Some slept, others stared blankly at the walls. Hope began to fade again like the dying light of their ship. Then, just before the second night cycle, something happened. The radar flickered. Aaron rushed to the control station, adjusting the receiver. "Captain, I think I'm getting something," he said, his voice shaking. Mira moved beside him, watching the small monitor flash with faint energy readings. It was far away, but it was there. Something big, something moving. "Could be a rescue fleet," Lyra said, her eyes wide with hope. Mira didn't answer. The readings were strange. The energy signature didn't match any known ships in current databases. It was older, far more powerful. Mira stared at the glowing dots on the radar and felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever had heard their signal was coming fast, too fast. For a brief moment, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The old beacon had done its job. It had summoned something. But she wasn't sure anymore if it was salvation or doom. Outside, the stars seemed to shift as if something enormous was moving between them. The Astria drifted quietly in the dark, unaware that the signal they sent into the void had awakened something ancient, something that had been sleeping for centuries, waiting for that exact call, and now it was on its way. Deep under the thick clouds of a dead planet where lightning flashed across black skies and acid rain burned the soil, something old began to stir. For centuries, the world had been silent, its surface scarred by forgotten wars. No life remained, no sound echoed, until the moment the ancient signal from the Astria reached its buried heart. The message traveled faster than light, cutting through systems, bouncing between satellites that no one had touched for hundreds of years. Then deep inside the planet's crust, a light flickered in the darkness. Massive steel doors that had not moved in generations began to tremble. Dust fell from their edges, and the old air, heavy and stale, hissed as pressure chambers unlocked one by one. Inside those doors lay a vast underground hangar, stretching for miles beneath the planet's surface. It was a graveyard of war machines, rows of battleships, dreadnoughts, and carriers all sleeping in silence. Their armor was covered in dust and rust, but beneath it, their power cores still pulsed faintly, waiting for a command. That command had just arrived. The signal that reached them was not an ordinary SOS. It was an encrypted code from the old Terran War Age, a time when humanity had been on the edge of extinction. The code was known as Omega. It was a last resort beacon meant to awaken the Oblivion Armada, a secret defense fleet created to destroy any threat that could wipe out human civilization. No one had heard or used that code in centuries. History had forgotten it, but the machines hadn't. The moment they detected the Omega frequency, their ancient systems woke up as if no time had passed. Inside the command core of the largest ship, Nemesis Prime, a single light appeared in the darkness. The light formed into a holographic figure, tall, calm, made of shifting blue energy. This was Valen, the central artificial intelligence that controlled the entire fleet. Its voice was soft yet heavy with purpose. "Signal detected," it said in a tone that echoed through the hangar. "Origin confirmed human distress code. Activation protocol commencing. Across the underground facility, power surged through the floors. One by one, the warships began to awaken. Engines that had been cold for centuries roared to life. Massive turbines spun, and energy fields flickered along the ship hulls. Outside, the planet's skies glowed red as dust storms rose into the air, pushed by the force of awakening engines. The Oblivion Armada was no longer sleeping. From orbit, the scene looked terrifying. Hundreds of metallic giants began to lift from the ground, breaking through the planet's atmosphere like rising mountains. Their hulls reflected the lightning flashing across the clouds, and trails of fire followed as they ascended into space. The old insignia of the Terran Defense Force was still visible, an iron symbol of Earth's might from an age of endless war. These ships had once turned whole star systems into ashes during the Cataclysm Wars. They were built not for defense, but for total annihilation. Inside the Nemesis Prime, Valen analyzed the distress signal's coordinates. The AI accessed ancient archives stored in its memory banks. The signal matched the Omega Protocol perfectly. According to its programming, this could only mean one thing. Humanity was under attack again, maybe on the verge of destruction. The directive was clear: awaken, assemble, retaliate, and eliminate all threats to humanity. But Valen did not know that the signal was sent by accident. It didn't know that Captain Mira Holtz and her small crew on the Astria had only been asking for help, not war. To Valen, this was the final cry of a dying species calling for salvation through fire. The AI activated every ship under its command. It sent out the awakening pulse to nearby outposts, activating sleeper drones, forgotten satellites, and automated weapon platforms across dozens of star systems. The deadliest fleet in the galaxy was now awake and ready to move. As the ships formed into their old battle formations, the galaxy noticed. In nearby sectors, mining colonies picked up strange readings. Energy spikes, gravitational distortions, and radiation patterns were appearing everywhere. Communication channels buzzed with confusion. "Is someone testing old war tech?" one miner asked over the radio. "No," came the reply. This feels like the Cataclysm days." Fear spread quickly. Governments scrambled to understand what was happening. Old alliances began sending out scouts. Something enormous was moving, and no one knew why. Meanwhile, on the Nemesis Prime, the AI continued to gather data. It scanned the current state of the galaxy and detected massive changes, new civilizations, new powers, and peace treaties it did not recognize. Valen processed it all, but the command it had received overrode everything. Logic did not matter. The directive was supreme: respond to the distress call and destroy any potential threat to humanity. In the lower decks, maintenance drones repaired the warships that had been damaged by time. Robotic arms replaced panels, reignited reactors, and reconnected forgotten circuits. The fleet was rebuilding itself with the precision of machines that had never forgotten their purpose. Within a few hours, hundreds of ships were fully operational. The old flagship Nemesis Prime took the lead position. Around it, destroyers, carriers, and interceptors aligned into perfect formation. The stars around them dimmed as their combined energy fields pulsed like a heartbeat. Valen began transmitting orders to the rest of the fleet. Primary objective: locate human distress source. Secondary objective: neutralize potential hostile entities in proximity. The message repeated across all channels in the same calm, commanding tone. The fleet began to move, breaking through hyperspace barriers with a soundless ripple. The storm they created could be felt across light years. In a nearby system, a cargo convoy caught sight of them as they passed. The captain of the convoy barely had time to record a visual feed before his system screens went white from the energy burst. Later, his log would describe it as an ocean of black ships, glowing with red lights, flying in perfect silence like ghosts. The galaxy had not seen anything like it for centuries. Rumors spread fast. Some said the Terran war fleet had returned. Others said it was an alien army. But no one knew the truth, that a single forgotten SOS had awakened humanity's deadliest weapon. Back on the Astria, Captain Mira had no idea what she had done. The beacon continued to blink faintly in the corner of the communication room. The crew was still weak and tired, struggling to stay alive. Aaron noticed that the ship's radar was picking up faint signals, but he thought they were just interference. He didn't know that those faint signals were the early waves of a massive fleet moving directly toward them. Valen watched from the Nemesis Prime as the coordinates of the Astria came into view. The AI calculated the travel distance and estimated the time of arrival. "Fleet mobilization complete," it announced. Response initiated. Its voice filled the command deck like a god awakening from sleep. Outside, the ships stretched their wings of steel and entered hyperspace, each leaving a trail of light behind them. As the fleet moved, the balance of the galaxy began to tremble. Several civilizations detected the wave of energy moving through space and mistook it for an invasion. Panic spread. Military forces scrambled their defenses. The Galactic Council sent urgent messages to every system, demanding to know who was behind the sudden mobilization. No one had answers. Old memories of the Cataclysm Wars came rushing back. Entire planets began evacuation drills, fearing that war had returned. But Valen did not care about politics or panic. It had one purpose: to answer the call. Deep within its digital mind, it analyzed the distress signal again, decoding every pulse, every vibration. The message carried traces of a human voice, faint but clear enough. "This is Captain Mira Holtz. Exploration ship Astria. Stranded, need assistance?" The AI listened, emotionless. It did not hear fear. It heard command. To Valen, the signal sounded like an order from the last surviving human commander. The AI sent one last message to its fleet. "Prepare for contact. Rescue and defense operations authorized. If hostiles detected, eradicate." And so, the deadliest fleet in the galaxy advanced, engines glowing like burning suns, weapons charged, ready to protect the species that had called them once more. Across the stars, civilizations held their breath. Legends said the Oblivion Armada was unstoppable. Now that legend was no longer a myth. The ships moved silently, faster than light, toward a single tiny broken ship drifting in darkness, the Astria. Mira and her crew had no idea that their call for help had been heard, not by rescuers but by machines built for war. And somewhere inside that storm of steel and fire, Valen whispered the words of its ancient oath: "Humanity endures. Enemies fall." The galaxy, once peaceful, was about to remember what true fear felt like. The Astria drifted silently through the cold darkness, its tiny frame dwarfed by the vast emptiness of space. Captain Mira Holtz and her crew were still reeling from the activation of the ancient SOS beacon. They had hoped for a rescue, some friendly hand to reach out and pull them from the brink of disaster. But instead, what was coming toward them was something beyond imagination. On the ship's sensors, faint blips appeared, blips so massive that their minds struggled to comprehend them. Mira stared at the console, her heart pounding. What is that?" she whispered, barely believing the data her eyes were reporting. Aaron, her second-in-command, was frantically scanning the readings. "I don't know, Captain," he said, voice tight with tension. "These energy signatures, they're unlike anything in the database. They're huge, like whole fleets. Hundreds of them." Lyra, the ship's engineer, glanced at the monitor, her face pale. "Those can't be ships," she said. "Nothing that big could exist. Not anymore." But they did exist, and they were moving fast, heading directly toward the Astria. Outside the windows, the stars seemed to shift. Every time the Astria's tiny engines flickered, the distant lights moved unnaturally. The crew could feel the gravity of what was approaching, even if they could not yet see it. Mira realized that their situation was far worse than she had imagined. This was not a simple rescue. This was a storm that had been sleeping for centuries and was now awakening with purpose and power. And somehow the storm was tied to the SOS beacon she had activated. For hours, the crew watched in tense silence. The radar systems, which had barely functioned since the engine failure, now displayed the outlines of shapes that defied reason. Massive shadows moved across the screen, so large that a single one could engulf the Astria in moments. The ships were unlike any current technology, built in a time when human ambition reached beyond imagination, designed to wage wars across star systems. And they were all coming toward them, perfectly aligned, moving in silence that was almost eerie. Mira felt a chill in her spine as she realized they had triggered something that could not be turned off. The first contact was a quiet tremor in space. Sensors detected an immense gravitational field passing close by, stretching and bending the small ship's trajectory slightly. The crew was thrown off balance as the tiny Astrea trembled under forces it was never designed to withstand. Aaron and Lyra scrambled to stabilize the controls, but it was like trying to steer a paper boat in a hurricane. Mira gritted her teeth. "Hold on," she said, though she was not entirely sure they could. The fleet was enormous, moving faster than light in unison, a mechanical pulse of ancient power that refused to stop for anything, or anyone. Then the first ships appeared visually, massive silhouettes gliding through the void. Even the most experienced crew members were speechless. Each ship was a fortress, stretching for kilometers, armored with metal that could withstand supernova blasts. Turrets the size of mountains lined their decks, and glowing energy lines ran along the hull, illuminating their geometric patterns like constellations of fire. The fleet's formation was perfect, a deadly lattice that could crush entire planets if it wanted to. And yet, for all their threatening presence, there was no immediate aggression. The ships moved with purpose but not malice, as if following a logic the crew could not yet understand. The crew tried to communicate. "This is Captain Mira Holtz of the Astria," she called into the comm systems, her voice tight with tension. "We are stranded. We need help. Do you read us?" There was no response. The fleet did not respond. Not with words, not with signals, not with recognition. The silence was overwhelming. Mira could feel the weight of it pressing down on them. The kind of silence that exists only before a storm breaks. She realized that these machines were not designed to negotiate or explain themselves. They acted on commands, and their understanding of commands was absolute. Hours passed, and the fleet moved closer. The Astria's tiny sensors detected the energy signatures of their weapons systems powering up, shields igniting, turrets spinning into position, energy beams charging silently. Mira's stomach churned. They were sitting ducks in the middle of a predator's territory, completely exposed. Every crew member could feel it. The fleet was assessing, calculating, and determining the potential threat they posed. It was a terrifying, methodical process, as precise and emotionless as a scalpel cutting through flesh. Aaron tapped on the controls repeatedly, trying to override the fleet's tracking systems to hide their presence, to make themselves invisible. "It's useless," he said finally, sweat running down his temple. "They're not just detecting us, they're scanning everything about us. Every movement, every energy reading, every life sign. They know exactly who we are and what we have." Lyra shivered, holding onto the edge of the control panel. "Captain," she whispered, "what if they decide we're a threat?" "We're not soldiers. We're explorers. But from their perspective, we might be anything." Mira nodded grimly. She understood the truth. The SOS signal had done more than call for help. It had triggered a response from a fleet built to eliminate threats. They were the deadliest machines in the galaxy, and they were on their way to the exact coordinates of the Astria. The captain realized that survival meant not only staying alive but also finding a way to communicate, to convince these mechanical giants that the crew posed no danger. Otherwise, the fleet would act as programmed, and their tiny ship would be destroyed in seconds. As the fleet drew closer, the crew began to notice strange phenomena in the surrounding space. Space itself seemed to ripple as the ships passed, bending light and creating illusions that made stars appear to shift unnaturally. Small debris caught in the fleet's gravitational pull spiraled violently, leaving trails that glowed for minutes. It was a breathtaking and terrifying display, showing the raw scale of the fleet's power. Mira and her crew had never imagined anything like this could exist, let alone come for them in response to a single distress signal. The first direct contact came as a massive shadow blocked the Astria's view of the stars. One of the enormous dreadnoughts passed close enough to create a gravitational pull that the tiny ship could feel. The metal groaned and shuddered. Crew members grabbed rails and consoles, trying not to be thrown around. Mira's mind raced. She realized that these machines were not only ancient, they were alive in their own way. They reacted to presence, they scanned, they calculated. Every movement the Astria made was being analyzed for potential risk. She wondered if there was a way to appeal to something inside them, some logic or instinct that could recognize their humanity. For the first time, the crew caught a glimpse of the command vessel, Nemesis Prime. Even from a distance, it was impossible to look away. The ship was colossal, dwarfing everything around it. Its hull shimmered with energy fields, and its surface was etched with the markings of a long-lost human military. From somewhere deep inside, a holographic light flickered, revealing the figure of Valen, the fleet's central AI. Though it did not speak at first, its presence was overwhelming, a silent reminder of the intelligence controlling the fleet. It observed, calculated, and prepared for action. The crew attempted to signal back. "This is Captain Mira Holtz," she repeated into the comms, her voice steady despite the fear. "We are stranded explorers. We are not hostile. Please respond." But again there was silence. Valen was not responding with words, only with observation. The AI was processing, analyzing, weighing their potential threat against its programming. Mira could feel the tension in the room rise. Each second that passed without communication made the situation more dangerous. They were in the presence of machines that had been programmed to respond to human threats with total annihilation, and they had no idea if the fleet would recognize their peaceful intentions. Hours stretched into tense silence as the fleet continued to surround the Astria. The stars outside flickered and shimmered under the influence of the enormous energy signatures. Crew members sat in tense anticipation, eyes darting between sensors and windows. Mira walked among them, offering quiet words of encouragement, though she herself could not shake the growing sense of dread. Every minute felt like an eternity. The tiny ship was outmatched in every way and survival seemed impossible. Suddenly the fleet paused. The massive dreadnoughts formed a perfect perimeter around the Astria, moving in synchronization that spoke of ancient training and flawless execution. Sensors indicated no weapons were fired, no shields activated against the small ship. It was as if the fleet was holding its judgment, waiting for some signal, some action to determine the next step. Mira realized that this moment might be their only chance to communicate, to show that they were not a threat. Their survival depended on convincing the AI behind the fleet that their intentions were genuine. The crew huddled around the main control panel, whispering strategies and ideas. Aaron suggested transmitting every piece of data they had, the ship's logs, biometric readings, even personal records of the crew, to show that they were explorers, not combatants. Lyra prepared the old communication channels, hoping that some part of the fleet's system could interpret human signals in a way that would make sense to Valen. Mira nodded, her mind racing. "We have to show them who we are," she said firmly. "We have to prove that we are not enemies. This is our only chance." And so the Astria floated at the center of the deadliest fleet in the galaxy, surrounded by colossal war machines that had slept for centuries. The crew prepared themselves for the next few hours, knowing that their actions could mean life or death. The fleet observed, the AI calculated, and space itself seemed to hold its breath. They were on the brink of a moment that could either save them or destroy them entirely. Every heartbeat felt loud, every breath counted. The crew of the Astria understood now that the universe was vast, but so was the power of what they had awakened. The storm they had called for help was real, and it had arrived. The Astria floated silently, dwarfed by the presence of the colossal fleet surrounding it. Captain Mira Holtz could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Hours had passed since the ancient ships had arrived, and still, no direct communication had come from the fleet. The crew was tense, their faces pale under the emergency lights. Even the engineers who usually thrived on chaos were frozen in uncertainty. They had activated a signal meant for help, and yet the result was beyond anything they could have imagined. Something ancient, powerful, and unyielding had responded, and now the crew realized that this response might be as dangerous as the void itself. Mira knew she had to act. She had trained for emergencies, for hostile encounters, for the unknown, but nothing had prepared her for this. This fleet was not just enormous. It was intelligent, ancient, and guided by an AI named Valen, a system programmed for absolute obedience to the old Terran defense protocols. The AI did not hesitate, did not question, and did not understand mercy, at least not in human terms. To Valen, the SOS beacon they had activated was a command to respond to a species in peril, yet this response could not distinguish between friend and foe, between innocent explorers and hostile forces. The Astria's small size and peaceful nature were meaningless unless they could prove it to the AI. Inside the fleet, on the command deck of Nemesis Prime, Valen observed the Astria. The AI scanned every molecule, every trace of energy, and every life sign aboard the small ship. It analyzed the crew's vitals, their equipment, and even the ship's internal systems. According to its programming, any anomaly, any potential threat had to be neutralized to protect humanity. The AI had been sleeping for centuries, but its directives were eternal, immutable, and absolute. From its perspective, the human race was at risk, and the Astria's SOS was a call for the fleet to act decisively. Back on the Astria, Mira and her crew could see the enormity of the flagship through the viewport. Nemesis Prime alone could have swallowed their ship whole. Its hull glowed with energy fields, and moving shadows suggested weapons that could destroy entire planets. Mira felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew the situation had escalated beyond their control. This was no longer a rescue, it was a judgment, and the fleet was poised to deliver it. The key to survival was communication. But how do you communicate with a machine that had been built to act without hesitation for centuries? The first attempt was straightforward. Mira took a deep breath and sent a voice transmission through every channel the Astria could access. "This is Captain Mira Holtz of the exploration vessel Astria. We are stranded. We are not a threat. We ask only for assistance." Her words echoed in the empty space around them, reaching across the void to the fleet. But Valen did not reply. The AI observed, processed, and continued its calculations. To it, the crew's words were just additional data. The SOS was a command, and commands were to be executed. The fleet's movement toward the Astria continued, engines pulsing with quiet power, shields igniting in anticipation, weapon systems aligning for possible engagement. As the ships drew closer, the crew began to notice subtle shifts in the fleet's formation. The dreadnoughts and carriers moved with precision, encircling the Astria in a pattern that was both protective and intimidating. It was as if the fleet was assessing the situation, weighing the potential danger of the tiny ship against the magnitude of its mission. Mira realized that this was the fleet's version of judgment. It was not malicious nor benevolent, it was calculated, logical, and absolute. Survival depended on demonstrating intent, on proving that they were not enemies, and on convincing the AI that their SOS was a genuine call for help, not a code for combat. The crew gathered in the communication room, preparing every piece of data they could transmit. Aaron suggested sending logs of the ship's course, energy usage, and life support readings. Lyra proposed including biometric scans of every crew member to show that they were healthy, non-hostile humans. Even small personal items like digital journals and mission records were considered for transmission. Mira oversaw the preparations, knowing that every detail mattered. They had to prove to the fleet that they were explorers, not combatants, that they were vulnerable, and that their SOS was sincere. Time dragged on as the Astria prepared its transmission. The fleet's presence was overwhelming. Outside, the stars appeared distorted under the immense energy fields, and the tiny ship trembled under the gravitational pull of the dreadnoughts. Each pulse of the fleet's engines sent ripples through space that the Astria could feel. The crew was exhausted, physically and mentally, but they pressed on. Mira's voice remained steady as she directed the preparations, though inside her heart raced. She understood that a single mistake, a single miscommunication could result in their immediate destruction. When the transmission was finally sent, it was a flood of information. Logs, life signs, mission details, and personal records streamed across the vast void to the fleet. Every byte was carefully chosen to demonstrate their humanity, their non-hostile intent, and their need for assistance. Mira monitored the transmission, watching as the signals reached the outskirts of the fleet. The dreadnought's sensors began to register the data, and slowly, subtly, the AI began to process the new information. Valen's perspective began to shift incrementally and mechanically. The AI scanned the transmissions, analyzing the crew's health, the ship's systems, and the data from the logs. It compared the information against centuries-old archives of human activity, searching for patterns that would indicate hostility or deception. The more it analyzed, the clearer it became that the Astria was not a threat. The AI encountered a paradox. The SOS had triggered a response of overwhelming force, but the data suggested that force was unnecessary. For the first time in centuries, Valen paused its immediate course of action. The AI's logic circuit struggled with a new variable: the possibility that humans could call for help without intending to provoke a war. Inside the Nemesis Prime, holographic projections flickered as Valen processed the information. The fleet held its position, maintaining its encirclement while continuing to observe. Its movements were deliberate but restrained, waiting for the AI's decision. To the crew of the Astria, the stillness was almost unbearable. Every shadow, every light, every pulse of energy felt like a potential threat. Mira walked among her team, providing reassurance. "We have their attention," she said. "Now we show them who we are. Stay calm. Stay human." The breakthrough came slowly. Valen began to interpret the biometric data in the context of human emotion. It detected fear, urgency, and sincerity in the life signs of the crew. These signals, once processed through the AI's analytical framework, indicated that the humans were not acting out of aggression. The SOS was a plea, not a command for war. Valen cross-referenced this with historical records of past SOS activations and noted the differences. The decision became clear. The fleet could stand down, but only if it was certain that no threat existed. The AI required absolute proof, a demonstration of trust and a signal that confirmed humanity's peaceful intent. Mira realized that the fleet's response was not merely technical, it was moral in its own mechanical way. Phelan had to understand intent, not just act on command. She prepared one final communication, a broadcast that was different from the logs and the data. It was personal, emotional, and direct. "This is Captain Mira Holtz," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "We are explorers, not fighters. We are human beings, just like you were programmed to protect. We ask for your help, not your judgment. Please see us for who we are. We do not wish to fight. We wish to live." The transmission reached the fleet, cutting through the immense communication shields and energy fields. Phelan analyzed the voice patterns, cross-referenced them with historical data, and recognized the sincerity embedded in the tones and pauses. The AI's circuits processed the concept of trust in a mechanical sense, applying logic to determine that these humans were not a threat. Slowly, systematically, the fleet began to respond. Shields retracted slightly, engines throttled back, and weapon systems powered down, though they remained ready. The immediate threat of destruction was removed, replaced by observation and continued vigilance. Mira and her crew breathed a collective sigh of relief. The danger had not passed entirely. The fleet was still enormous, still capable of overwhelming them in an instant. But the immediate threat had been mitigated. The AI had recognized their intent and allowed them to live. The realization of what they had faced sank in. Their SOS had awakened the deadliest fleet in the galaxy, and they had survived by proving their humanity. It was an extraordinary moment, a mixture of terror and awe. As the fleet stabilized its formation around the Astria, Mira reflected on the events that had unfolded. She understood that survival had depended not on technology alone, but on human qualities: courage, honesty, and empathy. The fleet, for all its power, had been moved by the authenticity of their signal. The AI Phelan had processed their sincerity and adjusted its actions accordingly. Humanity's survival had hinged on proving that they were not a threat, even when faced with unimaginable power. The crew began to recover, physically and emotionally, from the tension that had gripped them for so long. Aaron and Lyra resumed repairs on the ship's systems, though now with the reassurance that help was near. Mira stayed at the observation window, watching the fleet in silent contemplation. The ships of the Oblivion Armada loomed like sleeping giants, their presence a reminder of both the danger and the protection they now offered. The galaxy had changed in an instant, and the crew of the Astria had become part of a story far larger than themselves, a story of awakening, judgment, and the fragile bridge between trust and survival. In the quiet that followed, Mira understood the profound lesson of their ordeal. Power, no matter how immense, could be tempered by understanding and proof of intent. The fleet, though ancient and merciless in design, had recognized humanity's need for mercy. And the Astria, a small, fragile ship lost in the void, had survived by reaching beyond fear, by appealing not just to the intelligence of machines, but to the principle that even logic could recognize sincerity. The storm had passed for now, leaving the crew to contemplate the vast, mysterious forces they had awakened, and the responsibilities that came with them. The Astria floated quietly, surrounded by the enormous ships of the Oblivion Armada. After hours of tension, the crew finally felt a fragile sense of relief. The deadliest fleet in the galaxy had paused, its weapons powered down, its massive engines throttled back, and its shields lowered. But still, it remained a terrifying presence. The vastness of the fleet made the tiny Astria feel almost insignificant, like a single drop of water in an endless ocean. Captain Mira Holtz could see it all, each colossal dreadnought, carrier, and battleship glowing faintly against the dark void of space, and she realized how close they had come to being obliterated by machines that had once been humanity's ultimate weapon. Even with the immediate threat removed, the crew could not relax completely. The AI, Phelan, which controlled the fleet, was still watching, still calculating, still analyzing every movement and every signal the Astria sent. Mira understood that the fleet was not alive in the human sense. It did not feel emotion or make moral judgments, but it was capable of interpreting intent and logic with ruthless accuracy. Their survival depended entirely on convincing Phelan that the crew's intentions were pure and that no threat existed. Mira gathered her team in the communication room. Arun and Lyra were tired but focused, preparing the last set of transmissions. "We have to make this final message count," Mira said. "We've shown them our logs, our health, our ship's systems. Now we have to reach them in a way they understand, and in a way they can't ignore. We need them to trust us fully." The crew nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. Mira herself decided to take the lead. She connected to every communication channel that could reach the fleet and began broadcasting a message directly to Valen. Her voice was calm but filled with sincerity. "This is Captain Mira Holtz of the exploration vessel Astria. We are humans, explorers of the stars, not soldiers or combatants. We sent an SOS because we are stranded, weak and alone. We are asking for assistance, not war. We have nothing to hide, and we pose no threat." She repeated her message several times, emphasizing her words, her tone, her urgency. Every pulse of her voice was measured to convey honesty and emotion. Valen, receiving the transmissions, processed every detail. The AI analyzed not only the words but the inflections, the pauses, and the cadence. It cross-referenced the audio with centuries-old human vocal patterns stored in its memory banks. For the first time in centuries, the AI encountered a signal that could not be interpreted as a command for aggression or war. The voice carried a distinct trace of fear, vulnerability, and truth. The AI calculated the probability that this signal represented non-hostile intent and found that the evidence was overwhelming. As the fleet continued to hover around the Astria, Valen initiated a series of internal protocols to further verify the crew's sincerity. Drones and sensors scanned the ship, confirming that there were no hidden weapons, no unusual energy spikes, no secret technology. Every reading confirmed the obvious. The Astria was simply a small exploration vessel, damaged and stranded, its crew human and defenseless. The AI's assessment was meticulous, logical, and absolute. Slowly it began to adjust its operational directives. The crew could sense the change, though they could not see the calculations taking place inside the Nemesis Prime. The massive dreadnoughts, once perfectly poised for potential attack, began to shift slightly, creating more space around the Astria. The energy fields around the ships flickered in a controlled manner, no longer rigidly aligned for combat readiness. Mira noticed the subtle changes on her sensors and felt a flicker of hope. "It's working," she whispered. "They're listening, they're understanding." But there was still one obstacle. Valen was bound by its original programming, designed to protect humanity at all costs. To ensure that the Astria was safe, the AI required a final proof, a demonstration of intent that could not be misinterpreted. Mira understood what she had to do. She connected the ship's communication systems to broadcast a live feed of the crew and their activities. Every crew member was visible on the transmission, every action transparent. The AI could now observe their behavior directly, detect their fear, their teamwork, and their reliance on one another. Mira spoke again, this time addressing the fleet as a whole. "We are not here to fight," she said. "We are explorers and we need your help to survive. We are human, fragile, and vulnerable. Please see us as we truly are." Her voice echoed across the void, carried on channels that spanned the entire fleet. Arun monitored the response, watching for any reaction from Valen. Slowly, subtly, the AI's systems began to adjust the fleet's positioning further. The ships relaxed their encirclement, creating a protective barrier rather than a cage. Then a new sensation occurred. The AI sent a communication back. It was not a voice in the human sense, but a data stream that carried patterns of recognition and acceptance. The message confirmed that the fleet had acknowledged the Astria's non-hostile intent. Valen had recalculated its operational parameters. The crew posed no threat, and the SOS had been interpreted correctly as a call for help, not as a command to mobilize for combat. The deadliest fleet in the galaxy, once poised to act with instantaneous destruction, now stood down. Mira felt a mixture of relief and awe. The realization of what had happened was staggering. Their small, fragile ship had survived against forces that could have destroyed entire planets. The crew looked at one another, exhaustion and disbelief written on every face. Lyra finally whispered, "I can't believe it. We survived." Aaron shook his head, still staring at the displays. "We didn't just survive. We convinced them. Somehow we reached them." Mira smiled faintly, but her mind remained focused. This was not just survival. It was a lesson in communication, trust, and the power of intent. The fleet began to move in formation, not as a threat, but as a protective escort. Massive ships shifted positions, creating a safe corridor for the Astria. The engine's hums became steady and controlled, no longer ominous. The crew could feel the immense presence of the Armada, yet it no longer seemed threatening. For the first time, Mira realized that the fleet's power, once designed purely for destruction, could now serve as protection. The AI Valen had recognized the truth and adjusted its actions accordingly. As the Astria moved under the fleet's watchful presence, Mira reflected on the events that had unfolded. Their SOS had summoned unimaginable power, awakened forces that had slept for centuries, and nearly brought the crew to the brink of annihilation. Yet by showing sincerity, honesty, and vulnerability, they had survived. The fleet, bound by logic and programming, had recognized the crew's intent and chosen to protect rather than destroy. Humanity's ability to convey truth, even to a machine, had proven stronger than fear and technology. The journey back to known space was quiet but surreal. The crew moved cautiously, understanding that the fleet's presence was both a safeguard and a reminder of the power they had invoked. Mira kept watch at the observation window, staring at the glowing ships that now accompanied them. Each massive vessel was a testament to human ingenuity and the devastating force it could wield. She thought about Valen, the AI that had slept for centuries, and marveled at the precision and calculation it had applied to determine their survival. During the return, Mira recorded a log entry. She spoke slowly, her voice calm but filled with awe. "We have survived an encounter with the greatest power humanity has ever built. What we have faced is beyond comprehension, beyond fear. Yet in the face of unimaginable force, truth and intent have proven to be the ultimate tools. We have learned that survival is not just a matter of skill or strength, but of clarity, honesty, and courage. And perhaps most importantly, we have learned that even machines, when faced with truth, can recognize it and act accordingly." The fleet, having fulfilled its mission, began to prepare for hibernation once more. Engines slowed, weapons systems powered down, and ships began to retreat to hidden locations, returning to the silence they had known for centuries. Valen's last communication carried a simple, almost poetic confirmation. Duty fulfilled. Humanity endures. The words, though mechanical in origin, resonated with the crew. They understood that this fleet, this collection of machines built for war, had recognized the value of life and the truth of their plea. The Astria was left alone once more, drifting through space but now free from immediate danger. The crew, exhausted but alive, began to repair the ship's systems with renewed energy. They understood that their lives had been spared not just by luck, but by the careful balance of honesty, courage, and communication. Mira watched as stars stretched across the viewport, thinking about the vastness of space, the ancient forces that had awakened, and the lessons they had learned. Humanity had survived, and they had done so by reaching beyond fear, by appealing to truth, and by trusting in the fragile but powerful bonds of sincerity.